takes students when they are at their most vulnerable and criminalizes whatever problem they may be having.
In most school systems, student misconduct is handled by the school administrators, but in some, the police are asked to get involved and very early on. What's the result of that? What can and is being done about it? We're going to find out right now in this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest is New Mexico attorney Shannon Kennedy. I want to remind you right up front, if you'd like to ask Shannon questions about your situation, it's easy to do. Go to askthelawyers.com, click the button at the top that says Ask a Lawyer. It'll walk you right through a very simple process right there. Or, of course, you can always call the phone number that you'll see on the screen during our conversation. Shannon, thank you for making some time to answer our questions today.
You're welcome.
So I've seen this thing called the school to prison pipeline. Tell me what the school to prison pipeline is, and where have you seen this happen?
Well, we've seen it happen quite a bit in the public schools in the state of New Mexico. The public school to prison pipeline is essentially a policy where school administrators hire and call school resource officers to resolve disciplinary problems within their school. And in so doing, they violate the due process rights of their students. So back in the day, everyone used to go to the principal's office if they did something wrong. But now, especially, in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a trend towards school resource officers being placed in the schools and teachers calling the police if there's some disciplinary problem in the classroom. We had a client once who was arrested after burping loudly in the classroom and placed in handcuffs and removed from the school before he was even disciplined at all officially by the school. So it's a way to leapfrog over the due process rights of students. But even worse than that is it takes students when they are at their most vulnerable and criminalizes whatever problem they may be having. One of the studies that we discovered in representing children who were being removed from school in handcuffs is that many of these arrests took place like right before lunch. So students would get antsy and rowdy and do what, class clowns do, what kids do. And instead of just de-escalating the situation or, writing a student up, you should, go to detention or you should do whatever, sit in the corner. Teachers were calling the police and disrupting the child's entire life. And then the student would be driven from school down to a detention center, and the parents wouldn't even know this was happening. And they would get a call from the jail, come pick your student up. So this was happening in the public schools in the city of Albuquerque, and my law partner and I filed a class action lawsuit to change the standard operating procedures so that school resource officers were trained not to arrest students for nonviolent misdemeanor crimes in the public schools.
So let's back up a little bit. What would be the motivation for the schools to do this, to escalate like that, Shannon?
Well, I think the motivation is to get rid of students they don't like. And what is truly awful about the public school prison pipeline is it just like the prison systems and the jails all across America, they're disproportionately full of students of color and people of color. So statistical studies show nationwide that if you're African American, you're three times more likely to be arrested from the public schools for for minor disruptive behavior. And the other class of students that are discriminated against within the pipeline or put in the pipeline are those students who are disabled. And so what you see on the unconscious bias of if you're being generous and call it unconscious bias is that it's a way to get rid of students that the school administrators just don't want to have to deal with. And disproportionately, these students tend to be from ethnic minorities and in populations of students who have disabilities, either learning disabilities or physical disabilities. Specifically, students suffering from autism, for example. You'll have an autistic child having a meltdown because he wasn't accommodated, and we've seen autistic children handcuffed to chairs. So it's just an awful, awful trend across this country. And it's going absolutely in the wrong direction, because what happens is that these young people are completely disenfranchised from our communities, and they don't reach their full human potential. The consequences are devastating. So hopefully, through the civil rights litigation that's been going now for the last 15 years to oppose this kind of behavior on the part of school administrators and police departments, hopefully that now we know things have to change.
So you alluded a little to this a minute ago. So there have been some systemic changes put in place, though, right? Because of on the local level, because of the work your firm has done?
Absolutely. I mean, there's SOP within the city of Albuquerque Police Department where officers no longer arrested students and took them to the D home for nonviolent misdemeanor crimes. I mean, it reduced the number of arrests in 1 year from the public schools by, I think, approximately 130 was the drop. And, it didn't do anything but make the schools safer. What's really tragic is that police officers should be role models to students, because good police officers are out there saving lives. And instead, they're put in opposition to students. And it's just a disservice to the entire community. Also, the resources and the funding that goes into putting police officers in schools could be going towards providing school counselors and mental health medical care to those students within the schools, such as autistic students that need support and help from counselors and social workers, instead of criminalizing their disabilities.
And you've also had some effect on a federal level, too. Tell me about that.
Well, we have some federal civil rights cases, especially when we have seen police officers use tasers against students after they're handcuffed and restrained. There's been cases across the country where federal courts have found that it's unconstitutional, and that officers are on notice that it's unconstitutional to tase a child who's handcuffed, even though that seems so obvious to any normal parent or person whose student could be tased while at school. Sadly, it's happened. The other thing that's happened trend-wise is police officers in schools now have body-worn cameras. So we have the evidence that shows just how ugly and horrific it looks when you have a grown person placing handcuffs on a school child. And because of the video that has been played across this country, and communities being shocked by the behavior they see about little children being handcuffed, that I think the hearts and minds of Americans has turned against having police officers use handcuffs and tasers against school children.
You obviously you're there in New Mexico, but it sounds like you're saying this is something that's happening all across the country. Is it improving? Is the situation improving in your opinion? Are we seeing are things getting better?
I do believe things are getting better. I mean, we have prosecutors now, criminal prosecutors now, who are prosecuting police officers who are caught on their body-worn cameras abusing disabled children. So there has been a shift in perception. I think starting with the administrations of Ronald Reagan and Just Say No to Drugs, and the sort of gestalt in the country where it was very pro punishment and law enforcement. I think we've now shifted to a more compassionate approach to every aspect of the criminal justice system, and we're understanding that it's a zero-sum game, and that we have to stop criminalizing the despair of people. And we need to approach everyone in the public schools and in our communities with compassion, and that we are in the middle of a mental health crisis in our public schools, and with COVID making it so difficult for teachers to function within the public schools, that there has to be a reckoning and a new approach to education.
Fascinating conversation every time we talk, Shannon. Thank you so much for making some time to answer our questions.
You're welcome.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been New Mexico attorney Shannon Kennedy. I remind you, if you'd like to ask Shannon questions about your situation, go to askthelawyers.com. Click the button up at the top that says Ask a Lawyer, and it'll walk you through the very simple process right there. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal for Ask the Lawyers.